Thank you, and good morning to you. I'd like to thank BCG for inviting us here to this occasion and to give us a platform for sharing our reflections with you. It's an honor to come to a meeting of educationists and to share on and deliberate on the important problems of education. And Mr. Vikram Patel has given us an awesome responsibility, which I'm not sure we will be able to fulfill, but we'll try. This.
This one?
So there are two of us on this panel, and since it's a rather small panel, we thought we would each give a short presentation. I would do it in the form of an actual presentation, and Mr. Gautama will speak, not in the presentation format. And then perhaps we could take some questions based on that. So what I'm going to do is to present some of the reflections, you can say, of J. Krishnamurti on education. That's why I've titled it Krishnamurti on Education. These are some of the thoughts that underpin education in Krishnamurti schools. As you know, there are about 6 Krishnamurti schools in India and 2 overseas, one in England, one in California. There are not too many of them. All of them are rather small. So the total number in all these schools perhaps doesn't come to a very large figure. But necessarily education of this kind is not something which can be done on a mass scale. And perhaps the reasons for that will become clear when we actually go into what all this entails. In yesterday's sessions, many of them dwelt on what we need to do to prepare individual children for life in the 21st century in terms of preparation for jobs, in terms of what the working environment might be like, the kind of technological challenges and so on. But there's another aspect of education which I would like to dwell on this morning, which is what is the responsibility of education when it comes to society as a whole? What can education do actually when you look at the nature of the social problems, the environmental problems that beset us today? So the presentation is really with that in mind. So let me start by asking, could this be switched on, please? This thing, yeah? Oh, it's okay. I can refer to this, it doesn't matter. What is the purpose of education? This is an often asked question. For example, some of the things that were taken up yesterday were, should the purpose be skill and talent development so that students advance efficiently along their individual career paths? Certainly, this is a very relevant consideration. Technological instruction, proficiency in academics, and so on. Should the purpose be social, academic, cultural, and intellectual development of the students so that the students grow up to be engaged citizens? Yes, of course. Should the purpose be preparation towards entering the workforce and meeting the demands of industry? Well, this is certainly relevant, but as was pointed out yesterday, it's a very complex undertaking given the uncertainties of today's world. The purpose does not, of course, have to be exclusively one or the other. A proper understanding of the natural and man-made environment is essential for these purposes. Obviously, each one influences the others. Here are a couple of quotes from some well-known people. One is from the Washington Post, which says, "Critical thinking, creativity, interpersonal skills, and a sense of social responsibility all influence success in life, work, and citizenship." And something from Noam Chomsky, "Education is really aimed at helping students get to the point where they can learn on their own." So you can see in the second one, the focus is really on the individual in terms of his individual development and so on. But what is the relationship between this and what happens in society? I'm going to now read out a number of quotes from Krishnamurti. I have not always acknowledged the name Krishnamurti, but everything that is in italics is basically Krishnamurti's. So, and then I'll try to develop some of these thoughts as we go along. So question is, all this while relevant misses something central, an understanding of why there is such an extraordinary mess in the world. If you look at all the violence and the turmoil around us, and the turmoil is of a nationalistic, communal, and religious nature, in short, spreading over every possible zone. At the way we are in destroying the natural environment in every way possible, at the way we have become slaves to the entertainment industry and to consumerism. All these lead us to ask why. And also, is there a different approach? What is it that has led to this extraordinary complexity in today's society, which has brought us to the brink of utter disaster, which is climate change? More than war, it is climate change which is threatening us today. So here are some quotes. First, the ignorant man is not the unlearned, but he who does not know himself. Understanding comes only through self-knowledge, which is the awareness of one's total psychological process. Thus, education, in the true sense, is the understanding of oneself, for it is within each one of us that the whole of existence is gathered. If we really take this to heart, what does it mean for our education system? What does it mean for what we do in the classroom? What we now call education is a matter of accumulating knowledge from books. Such education offers a subtle form of escape from ourselves, and like all escapes, it creates increasing misery. Conflict and confusion result from our own wrong relationship with people, with things, and with ideas. Until we understand that relationship and alter it, the gathering of facts and the acquiring of various skills can only lead us to engulfing chaos. I think the thinking behind this is, you'll notice that when we try to solve problems in the world, whether it's economic problems, social problems, various kinds of problems, we always seem to think that the problem lies somewhere out there. And the action that we have to take is somewhere out there. It could be we use tools of technology or all the computational aids that we have today and try to solve these. But we soon discover that the solution that we propose itself becomes the cause of more problems. That is the common pattern that we have observed if you see how technology develops, how our relationship with the environment develops. And if we really reflect, unless we find the source of the difficulty, which is within ourselves, we are going to endlessly perpetuate this cycle. Which is why this question, that conflict and confusion result from our own wrong relationship with people, things, and ideas. Until we understand that relationship and alter it, the gathering of facts can only lead us to engulfing chaos. As society is now organized, we send our children to school to learn some technique by which they eventually learn a livelihood. We want to make the child a specialist, hoping thus to give him a secure economic position. But does the cultivation of a technique enable us to understand ourselves? While it is necessary, will technique give us the capacity to understand life? Now, why is this question being raised? In fact, some of the things that I'm reading out here were brought out by Shri Vikram Patel just a few minutes back. This question of academic understanding, of skill, of technique. We can become very proficient in doing particular things. But as long as we don't really understand ourselves, we are going to continue spreading difficulties. Now, I'm going to be going into this question of what it means. How does it happen, this modus operandi of spreading problems through unresolved situation within ourselves? Just to continue, surely technique is secondary And if technique is the only thing we are striving for, we are denying what is by far the greater part of life. Life is pain, it is joy, beauty, ugliness, love. And when we understand it as a whole, at every level, that understanding itself creates its own technique. But the contrary can never be true. Technique never brings about creative understanding. Present-day education thus becomes a failure because it has overemphasized technique. Technique without self-understanding leads to ruthlessness, which we cover up with pleasant-sounding phrases. Of what value is it to emphasize technique and become efficient entities if the result is mutual destruction? Our technical progress is fantastic, but it has only increased our powers of destroying one another. So I'd like to raise that question once again, which I put at the beginning of this presentation. What is the purpose of education? We tend to have an additive model in mind when we think about education. We say it is academics, then we add on, we say they should also know about art, they should also know about sports, they should also be exposed to nature, they should also be this and also be that. It's an additive, accumulative kind of model. But is there a different starting point? In fact, this point was also brought out in one of the presentations yesterday. I think it was Ruchira's. I hope I've not made an error. Can we start from the inside rather than from the outside in this additive, accumulative way? Can there be a different purpose to education? And I think what Krishnamurti says can indeed be a different paradigm when he says, the ignorant man is not the unlearned, but he who does not know himself. Thus, education is the understanding of oneself, for it is within each one that the whole of existence is gathered. Once someone asked him this question, Krishnamurti asked Krishnamurti, what is the significance of history in the education of the young? And in part he replied thus. He says, if history is the story of mankind, the story of human beings, the educators and the young are also the human beings. Therefore it is their story, and not merely the story of kings and wars. It is the story of themselves. How can the educator help the student to understand the story of himself, which is the story of the past? If you are the educator and I the young student, how would you help me understand the whole structure, the whole nature and structure of myself? Myself being the whole of humanity, the result of many million years. It is all in me, the violence, the competition, the brutality, the cruelty, the fear, the pleasure, and the occasional joy and that perfume of love. How will you help me understand all this? To Krishnamurti, just that quote I think was read out right at the start of this session, a school is a place where one learns about the wholeness of life. And he says, academic excellence is absolutely necessary. I think there's no two ways about that. Absolutely no question of downplaying the importance of academics and skill. But a school must include much more than that. It is a place where the teacher and the taught must explore not only the outer world and the world of knowledge, but also their own behavior. From this, they begin to discover their own conditioning and how it distorts thinking. This conditioning is the self to which such tremendous and cruel importance is given, which our society encourages us. I'm going to try to dwell on some of these aspects in a couple of minutes. Freedom from conditioning begins with this awareness. It is only in such freedom that learning can take place. In this school, well, in all schools perhaps, it is the responsibility of the teacher to sustain with the student an exploration into the implications of conditioning and thus put an end to it. The word freedom occurs very widely in the writings of Krishnamurti, and also it is a very widely used word in society because we talk of so many ways, so many freedom in so many different ways. But it is also one of the most misunderstood words. In ordinary usage, freedom is a kind of sanction. It is given to us by somebody. For example, we won our freedom from the British. We are given freedom of speech in a school or in a democracy. We have freedom of expression, various kinds of freedom. These are all freedoms which are sanctioned to us. But that's not the sense in which Krishnamurti is using that word. He gives a different meaning to that word. Political freedom and freedom of expression are, of course, vital, but they are not enough. We also need inward freedom. In cultivating intelligence, there must be a sense of freedom. This does not mean freedom to do what one likes, or to think in the spirit of mere contradiction, which is often how we think of freedom, that I have the freedom to do what I like, I have the freedom to speak anything that comes to mind, and perhaps contradict, go against laws and so on. Freedom is not the expression of one's own desire, choice, or self-interest. Freedom of choice is not freedom, though it may appear so. You work hard for your living, you spend years at the business of being bossed around in order to earn a livelihood, swallowing the insults, the indignity, the sycophancy. But to work so that the mind is free is much more arduous. It requires insight, comprehension, an extensive awareness in which the mind knows its impediments, its blockages, its movements of self-deception, its fantasies, its illusions, its myths. So now I'm going to raise a few matters to ponder over. I've listed various points out here. I'd like to say a little bit about all these, because I believe they need to be gone into very carefully in our schools so that children really come to feel the nature of the difficulty involved. First of all, there's the question of authority. Particularly in our country, we tend to give very high importance to authority. It's part of our culture, perhaps, part of our tradition. Religious authority, governmental authority, political authority. We are very, the way we behave towards authority is often extremely undignified. And also in school, that whole pattern tends to get replicated. And I think we need to, it's our responsibility to cultivate right from the earliest year that kind of right attitude towards authority, which means it's the second question now coming in, the question of power, of status and function, and the relationship between that and authority. Why is power such a problem in human relationship? Why does power so often express itself in extraordinarily ugly ways? When we are given the power to do something through a job, say a governmental job and so on, or any other job, it's actually a function that we have to perform. We are given a certain range of abilities, a certain range of things that we can do. And the moment we borrow from that into our own personal lives, sort of appropriate it into our relationships, we are actually misusing it. We are borrowing from function into status, into our personal life, you can say. So how is it, can we be more sensitive to this question, this relationship of function and appropriation of power into our personal lives? Because that's where authority also comes in. And unless we become extremely sensitive to this matter, extremely finely tuned to this matter, we are endlessly going to perpetuate this. And children pick up these cues. Teachers may be doing it, the administrators in schools may be doing it, and they pick up these, parents may be doing it, and the children simply perpetuate this whole pattern of society. So these two questions are of prime importance. Learning about authority, learning about power. Being able to, of course, authority has other connotations as well. Being able to question, learning how to question. I think in a school, we need to learn the art of questioning, which means the art of going into something without not through insolence, not through just contradicting somebody, but actually exploring something. Because that's how a society must grow, must advance. Just to jump to the last point, the teacher as a critic of society. We tend to think of a teacher, that model which was stated in one of the early slides, that the function of education is to prepare children for industry. Now that model gives you a sense that the child's, the function of the school is simply to produce somebody who fits into society, just a cog in the wheel. But I think there's another very important aspect of education. Can the teacher be a critic of society? A moral critic, being able to point out deeply what is wrong with society, where we have the wrong values that we have gone into. So that rather than a school being a place where you simply replicate the values of society, you have to discover new values. You have to discover something new. Not just new in the sense of new knowledge, new information, new techniques, but new values, how do you find really the true value of something unless you deeply understand the intrinsic worth of it, the intrinsic nature of something? So this is something which teachers need to go into in their own lives, and in that same process, go into it with students. Now that question of how you can go into such complex matters with students, we'll have to discuss that later. I think Mr. Gautama is going to go into some of these in his presentation. Then the third point we listed out there, the question of fragmentation. We have become used to this idea in modern society that we live very divided lives, that we have one kind of life in the workplace and another kind of life in our homes, maybe a third kind of life when we are with our friends. Now, I think it's an extremely dangerous thing when we start having different values to suit different circumstances. And I believe this is a very major problem in our society today, of having different values to suit different circumstances. For example, if the same person who is a very loving family person, a loving father or husband or mother or whatever, goes into the office and then suddenly becomes an utterly tyrannical boss, very authoritarian, extremely, ruthless in the conduct of whatever the objectives of that organization are. I think this is a question of divided values. And this deep sense of fragmentation perhaps exhibits itself in many different ways. For example, I've written of being an individual. The root meaning of that word individual is supposed to be undivided. And undivided also has that sense of integrity, of wholeness. We've been talking of holistic. All these things are related notions of being really an individual. And in contrast, we have this fragmented way of living, which we are being encouraged to do. We often talk of so-called professionalism, of showing one kind of face in an office and another kind of face at home. Why should there be this strange contrast? I think it brings about a certain lack of humanity in us. Another question I have raised out here is the question of talent, which is, I think, extremely topical in today's society, which is today we are encouraged to make a very big thing of talent. That is the direction in which society is going today. We are becoming more and more a narcissistic society, the selfie society, you can say. And in particular, we are tending to fall in love with our own talents and trumpet those talents out in society loudly as possible. Me first, me this, me that. But what is the right relationship with talent? What is the right relationship with a gift that one has got? What is the right relationship with money, for example? All these are questions which need to be raised at the school level, because if they're not raised at the school level, they will never be raised. There's no platform in life when such questions are going to be asked, except when one is in school. It's not that the answers are going to be found. That's not the point. The point is to raise these questions, and you can say to plant these questions in a child's mind, a student's mind, so that they take root there as questions, not as answers. Not that the teacher is planting some definite idea in a student's mind. I think that would be quite wrong. But it's a question that is being planted. Again, more matters to ponder. What does it mean to love the earth? To really, how does one develop that feeling of love, of care? And if there is love of the earth, will that not bring about a certain frugality in our way of living? What does it mean? Today, for example, let's talk about earning, how much one earns. How much should one earn? Somehow, the mood that has been created in today's world is one should earn more and more and more. Just the more the better. The more is equated with the better. But do we ever ask, why should one earn more? Why is it necessary to keep on earning more and more and more? Why is it necessary to keep on consuming more and more and more? We perhaps are not reflecting on the consequences of this kind of a philosophy, what it is doing to the earth. We often talk of the effects of nuclear war and so on, and of course these are going to be deadly for human beings if we have war. Great suffering is caused. But we may not realize that in terms of the total effect on the environment, it is our philosophy of consumption which is the most deadly thing of all. Our consumerist approach to life. Consume more and more and more. And the way it is eating up the whole of nature. What is simplicity? What does it mean to be simple, to be innocent, to be unwounded, to have gone through sorrow and yet not hold that sorrow, to have gone through hurt and yet not hold that hurt, to not hold any anger in oneself? What does all this mean, simplicity? I think these are things, again, which have to be gone into so that their nature, the beauty of simplicity needs to be experienced by a child. Simplicity in a teacher, simplicity in a child. But, these are not things which generally are talked about at the school level. Then again, what is the art of listening to somebody? Listening completely to somebody. Listening without any sense of evaluation, without any sense of measurement, without any sense of assessment. Yesterday it was mentioned, again I think it was perhaps Ruchira who said it, listening always with a sense of working out a reply. Even before you have listened, you're figuring out a reply to something. Well, that's not listening then. What is the art of listening? I think this is a skill which only by careful understanding and reflection maybe we'll be able to learn such a skill. And how important it is for relationship, the art of listening. And lastly, what does it mean to think together, to work together? We've been talking of cooperation. Now, the model that we often have is that we think together on something. We think together about a problem of national importance, or about climate change, or something that is confronting us. We always think together about something. Or we work towards solving some common problem. But in all these, the model tends to be something out there, thinking about something away from us. Is there such a thing as actually being together? Can the together come first and the thinking after that, thinking together after that? What does actually relationship mean? So these are all questions which are extremely important at the school level, and somehow they tend to be completely left out of the whole ambit of school education because we are so completely bogged down by having to convey technique and information and knowledge and skills. Whereas this is vital because it is the underpinning of peace, the underpinning of a sense of harmony in the world. So I hope these things can somehow take root in our education system more widely. I'd like to end by reading out a little a piece for you, and then I'll stop. It is a question that was posed to Krishnamurti by a teacher who asked, what is the work of man? What actually are we here for? It's a very beautiful question if you think about it. What are we here for? And this is what he said in part. I'll just finish, read out these 3 slides and stop. What do you think it is? Is it to study, to pass examinations, get a job and do it for the rest of your life? Is it to go to the temple, to join groups, to launch various reforms? Is it man's work to kill animals for his own food? Is it man's work to build a bridge for the train to cross, to dig wells in a dry land, to find oil, to climb mountains, to conquer the earth and the air, to write poems, to paint, to love, to hate? Is all this the work of man? Building civilizations that come toppling down in a few centuries, bringing about wars, creating God in one's own image, killing people in the name of religion or the state, talking of peace and brotherhood while usurping power and being ruthless to others. This is what man is doing all around you, is he not? And is this the true work of man? You can see that all this work leads to destruction and misery, to chaos and despair. Great luxuries exist side by side with extreme poverty, disease and starvation with refrigerators and jet planes. All this is the work of man. And when you see it, don't you ask yourself, is that all? Is there not something else which is the true work of man? If we can find out what is the true work of man, then jet planes, washing machines, bridges, hostels will all have an entirely different meaning. But without finding out what is the true work of man, merely to indulge in reforms, in reshaping what man has already done, will lead nowhere. So what is the true work of man? Surely the true work of man is to discover truth, God. It is to love and not to be caught in his own self-enclosing activities. In the very discovery of what is true, there is love. And that love in man's relationship with man will create a different civilization, a new world. So I'll stop here.